Right now, as you're watching this video, you're living in what scientists call an interglacial period, essentially a brief, warm break between ice ages. But what if that break never came? What if our planet remained locked in an eternal winter, with ice sheets covering most of North America and Europe, and global temperatures averaging 10 degrees Celsius colder than today? The human story would be completely rewritten. No ancient civilizations rising along fertile river valleys. No agricultural revolution. No cities, no technology as we know it. Just small bands of hardy survivors clinging to life in a world dominated by ice, cold, and the constant struggle for survival. Today, we're exploring this frozen alternate reality and discovering how different our world and our species would truly be. Welcome to Mindshift. Don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment with your favorite topic. We read every single one and use your suggestions for future videos. In our frozen alternate reality, massive ice sheets stretch as far as the eye can see across what we know today as Canada, the northern United States, and most of Europe. These aren't just thick layers of snow. We're talking about ice formations over a mile thick in some places, heavy enough to actually depress the Earth's crust beneath them. The Laurentide ice sheet would cover everything from the Arctic Ocean down to roughly where Chicago sits today. New York City, buried under thousands of feet of ice. The Scandinavian ice sheet would blanket most of northern Europe, while smaller ice caps would crown the Alps, the Rockies, and the Himalayas, though these mountains would be significantly more massive than they appear today due to the weight of accumulated ice. But here's where it gets really interesting. With so much water locked up in these massive ice formations, global sea levels would plummet by roughly 400 feet compared to our current world. That means entirely different coastlines everywhere. Britain and Ireland would be connected to mainland Europe by a vast stretch of exposed land. You could literally walk from Alaska to Russia across what we now call the Bering Strait. The Mediterranean Sea would be much smaller, almost like a large lake, and many of today's coastal cities would be sitting far inland from any ocean. The weight of these ice sheets would create their own weather systems. Cold, dry winds would constantly blow off the ice, creating what scientists call katabatic winds, fierce, howling gales that would make survival near the ice edges incredibly challenging. These winds would carry ice crystals and create ground blizzards even on relatively clear days. The boundary between the iced and ice-free zones wouldn't be a gentle transition either. There would be a stark, dramatic line where the world of ice meets the world of tundra and sparse vegetation. This boundary would shift slightly with seasonal changes, but never by much. The ice would be a permanent, imposing feature of our planet's geography, fundamentally altering how air masses move around the globe and creating weather patterns unlike anything we experience today. The oceans in our ice-locked world would be completely different beasts. With temperatures averaging 10 degrees Celsius colder globally, much more of the ocean surface would freeze solid during winter months. The Arctic Ocean would be permanently frozen, creating a solid ice bridge connecting all the northern continents. Even parts of the North Atlantic and North Pacific would develop seasonal ice coverage, extending much further south than anything we see today. Ocean currents, the great conveyor belts that distribute heat around our planet, would flow along entirely different paths. The Gulf Stream, which currently keeps Western Europe relatively warm, would be much weaker or possibly non-existent. Without this thermal lifeline, places like London would have climate similar to northern Canada today, if they weren't already buried under ice. The thermohaline circulation, the global ocean current system driven by differences in water temperature and salinity, would operate at a much reduced capacity. Cold water would dominate everywhere, creating a much more sluggish system of heat distribution. This means that any heat generated near the equator would have a much harder time reaching the polar regions, reinforcing the cold conditions and making the ice sheets even more stable and permanent. Weather patterns would be dramatically simplified, but also more extreme. Without the moderating influence of our current ocean systems, temperature swings between seasons would be more severe. Storms would be different too. Less energy in the atmosphere means fewer hurricanes and typhoons, but the storms that do form would often be accompanied by brutal cold and devastating ice storms. Precipitation patterns would shift dramatically. Most of the water evaporating from the smaller, colder oceans would fall as snow rather than rain, feeding the ice sheets and maintaining their massive size. The water cycle would be much slower. Water gets locked up in ice for thousands of years before eventually making its way back to the ocean. Clouds would form differently too. The atmosphere would be drier overall, leading to clearer skies, but also more extreme temperature drops at night. Without cloud cover to trap heat, nighttime temperatures in ice-free regions would regularly plummet to levels that would challenge the survival of most plant and animal life as we know it. The regions not covered by ice wouldn't be tropical paradises. They'd be harsh, unforgiving environments where only the toughest life forms could survive. Most of what we consider temperate regions today would resemble the Arctic tundra, with permafrost extending much deeper into the ground and a very short growing season of just a few months per year. Forests as we know them wouldn't exist in most places. Instead of towering oak trees or dense pine forests, the landscape would be dominated by low-growing shrubs, hardy grasses, and specialized plants adapted to extreme cold. The tree line, the elevation or latitude beyond which trees can't grow, would be much lower and further south than today. Only in the most protected valleys and the warmest regions near the equator might you find anything resembling the forests we're familiar with. Animal life would be completely different. The megafauna we associate with the Ice Age, woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, would still roam the ice-free zones. These creatures evolved specifically to handle extreme cold, with thick fur coats, layers of fat, and behavioral adaptations that helped them survive in harsh conditions. Smaller animals would need similar adaptations: thick fur, the ability to hibernate for extended periods, or behavioral strategies like living in large groups for warmth. Rivers and lakes in these ice-free zones would freeze solid for much of the year, creating additional challenges for any life trying to establish itself. The few that remain liquid year-round would be crucial oases of life, supporting small ecosystems of fish, water birds, and the animals that depend on them. Plant growing seasons would be incredibly short, perhaps just 60 to 90 days in the best locations. This would make it nearly impossible for any species, including humans, to develop agriculture as we know it. Food sources would be limited to what could be hunted, gathered from hardy wild plants, or preserved from the brief summer growing period to last through the long, brutal winters that would dominate most of the year in even the most hospitable regions. In our ice-locked world, human evolution would have taken a dramatically different course. The selective pressures of constant cold would have shaped our bodies in ways we can barely recognize. Over tens of thousands of years, humans would likely have developed several key physical adaptations to survive in this frozen world. First, we'd probably be significantly shorter and more compact. This isn't just speculation. It's based on Bergmann's rule, a biological principle that shows animals in colder climates tend to have lower surface area to volume ratios to conserve heat. Our limbs would be shorter relative to our torso, and our hands and feet would be smaller, but with thicker digits to prevent frostbite. We'd also likely have developed a much more robust layer of subcutaneous fat, similar to what we see in Arctic-adapted populations today, but more pronounced. Our metabolism would be fundamentally different. Humans in this world would burn calories at a much higher rate just to maintain body temperature, which means we'd need to consume significantly more food if we could find it. This would drive the development of more efficient digestive systems and possibly the ability to digest foods that modern humans can't process, like certain raw plant materials or even partially frozen meat. Skin pigmentation would be lighter across the board, as the reduced sunlight in this ice-dominated world would make vitamin D production extremely challenging. But we'd also likely develop other ways to synthesize essential nutrients, possibly through symbiotic relationships with bacteria in our gut, similar to how some Arctic animals have evolved. Our social structures would be entirely different too. Survival in small family groups wouldn't be enough. Humans would need to form larger, more cooperative bands to have any chance of making it through the brutal winters. These groups would need to be highly organized, with specialized roles for hunting, toolmaking, shelter construction, and resource management. The concept of individual privacy or personal space would be almost non-existent. Survival would depend on sharing body heat, resources, and knowledge in ways that would seem incredibly intimate by today's standards. The social bonds that held these groups together would need to be incredibly strong, because abandoning the group would mean certain death. Technology in our frozen world would develop along completely different lines than the path human civilization actually took. Without access to many of the materials and resources that fueled our historical technological development, humans would become master craftspeople of ice, bone, stone, and the limited organic materials available in their harsh environment. Fire would be the most critical technology, but maintaining it would be an enormous challenge. With limited wood available, humans would need to become experts at finding and using alternative fuel sources. Animal fat, dried dung, and even certain types of combustible lichens and mosses. Fire maintenance would be a round-the-clock job, with members of the group taking shifts to ensure the flames never died completely, because restarting a fire in extreme cold with primitive tools could mean the difference between life and death. Toolmaking would focus heavily on materials that could withstand extreme cold without becoming brittle. Bone tools would be preferred over wood in many cases, and humans would develop sophisticated techniques for shaping mammoth tusks, caribou antlers, and other large animal bones into everything from spear points to needle-like tools for sewing warm clothing. Clothing technology would be incredibly advanced, far surpassing anything we developed historically until modern synthetic materials. Multi-layer systems using different types of fur and hide, sophisticated techniques for waterproofing with animal fats and oils, and incredibly detailed knowledge of how different materials perform in various cold and wet conditions. Every stitch would matter. Poor clothing construction wouldn't just be uncomfortable, it would be fatal. Shelter construction would be an art form. Humans would master building with snow blocks, creating semi-permanent ice houses, and constructing shelters that could withstand massive temperature swings and fierce winds. They'd understand thermal dynamics in ways that would impress modern engineers, how to create air circulation systems using natural convection, how to build insulation layers using available materials, and how to position shelters to take advantage of natural windbreaks and sun exposure. Storage and preservation technology would be crucial. Without refrigeration as we know it, but with natural freezing available, humans would develop sophisticated methods for preserving meat and other foods through controlled freezing, smoking, and drying techniques that could keep food viable through the long winters. Human society in this ice-locked world would be fundamentally communal by necessity. The concept of individual wealth accumulation would be nearly meaningless when survival depends on sharing resources and supporting the weakest members of the group. Social hierarchies would still exist, but they'd be based on skills essential to group survival, rather than resource hoarding. Leadership roles would likely rotate based on seasonal needs and changing challenges. The best hunter might lead during certain times of year, while someone with superior shelter-building skills or knowledge of weather patterns might take charge during others. Decision-making would be highly collaborative because a single bad choice could doom the entire group. Marriage and family structures would be shaped by survival needs. Partnerships would likely be arranged to maximize genetic diversity within small populations and to ensure that essential skills are passed down through generations. Child rearing would be a community responsibility, with multiple adults involved in teaching each child the complex set of skills needed to survive. Cultural practices would center around the seasons and the constant struggle with cold. Storytelling would be crucial for preserving knowledge about weather patterns, animal behavior, food sources, and survival techniques. These wouldn't just be entertainment, they'd be survival manuals passed down through oral tradition. Religious or spiritual beliefs would likely focus heavily on the cycles of cold and warmth, the movements of ice, and the relationships between humans and the animals they depend on for survival. Rituals would probably be tied to successful hunts, the changing of seasons, and the maintenance of group harmony. Art would exist, but it would be highly functional. Decorative elements on clothing, tools, and shelters would serve practical purposes, identifying ownership, indicating status or skills, or even serving as memory aids for important survival information. The pace of cultural change would be incredibly slow. When survival depends on proven methods, innovation becomes risky. New ideas would need to prove themselves over many seasons before being widely adopted. This would create societies that are incredibly stable, but also resistant to rapid change, even when that change might be beneficial. The margin for error would be so small that conservative approaches to life would dominate every aspect of human culture. So there you have it. A world where the Ice Age never ended would be almost unrecognizable compared to the planet we call home today. Massive ice sheets dominating entire continents, dramatically altered ocean levels and weather patterns, and human civilization taking a completely different evolutionary path. We'd be shorter, stockier, and built for survival in ways that would make our current lives seem impossibly comfortable by comparison. The technology we take for granted, from agriculture to written language to complex societies, simply wouldn't exist. Instead, we'd be master craftspeople of ice and bone living in small, tightly knit communities where every decision could mean the difference between life and death for the entire group. Our culture, our relationships, even our physical bodies would be shaped by the relentless demands of surviving in a world locked in eternal winter. It's humbling to realize how much our current civilization depends on the relatively warm, stable climate we've enjoyed for the last 10,000 years. The agricultural revolution, the rise of cities, the development of technology, all of it was only possible because the ice retreated and gave us the breathing room to build the world we know today. This alternate reality also makes you appreciate the incredible adaptability of human beings. Even in the harshest conditions imaginable, our species would find ways to survive, develop technology, create art, and build meaningful communities. We'd be different, certainly, but we'd still be recognizably human in our drive to survive and thrive against all odds. What aspects of this frozen world fascinate you the most? Would you want to live in a society where survival depended entirely on cooperation? Or do you think humans would have found different ways to adapt? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your perspectives on these alternate history scenarios. And if you enjoyed exploring this icy alternate reality, make sure to subscribe to Mindshift for more thought-provoking videos about how different our world could have been. What topic should we explore next? Comment your favorite alternative history scenario or scientific what-if question, and you might see it featured in a future video. Until next time, stay curious about the countless possibilities that shape our universe.